Hi, this is Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our how-to series, we're going to look at how to distinguish between true injuries as the onset of TMS, or mind-body issues, and something that is a mind-body issue right from the start, as well as how to work with true injury onset TMS and the doubt it can cause. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or get any of my PDFs at www.crushingdoubt.org. People who understand Sarno and mind-body symptoms are at an advantage over others that is almost impossible to verbalize. We have a chance to live our best lives for multiple reasons, but we can begin with the fact that we almost always, barring a severe medical condition, get to live free of chronic physical pain and symptoms of all varieties. But even we have to grapple with all of the questions the mind can come up with, and there's a lot of them. One of the reasons my system gives people something new is that I won't ignore any of those questions, because they not only need to be answered, but they gain power over us if they go unanswered. As any of my viewers and listeners will know, I use science and logic in everything, so leaving a question unanswered just won't work for me. That's not good science, it's not good logic. The reason we can't leave any question unanswered is that is what leads to doubt, just as it should. If I can't answer a question or I'm willing to leave it unanswered, how can you trust the science or the logic I'm talking about? Today I'm going to tackle one of the questions that is naturally on many people's minds, and I've heard it asked many, many times. How can I have a mind-body issue if it all began with an actual physical injury? This is a great question. You guys ask lots of great questions. So here's the answer. Mind-body issues can emerge with or without an actual injury. The reason for this is that all it takes for you to have a chronic mind-body issue is for a feedback loop to develop between the mind and the body. And that can happen at any point in time. It can happen with or without an injury. The only difference is the timeline of when that feedback loop begins. And this mostly depends on the individual or maybe the circumstances of events. One piece of information you can always fall back on is that all injuries to soft tissues heal. All of them. Here's the hard part. If we can sign on to this viewpoint, we will be in a much better place to combat doubts about true physical injuries. If we can't sign on to that idea, we've got to keep talking about it. But here's an example that might be helpful to you. Do you know of any cuts that just never ended up closing up, for example? Nope. That never happens. And it is because all soft tissue injuries heal. All of them. We can keep talking about it, but that is something you're going to need if you're going to get to resolution about this issue. Now, what does it mean that healing always takes place? What it means is that any physical issue to the musculoskeletal system heals within a certain amount of time. Broken bones, pretty serious injury, heal in 8 to 12 weeks at maximum. 4 to 6 weeks when less severe, sometimes 6 to 8 weeks, but it's always somewhere in that time frame. So if we sign on to the idea that the body heals, we need to ask ourselves this question in response to the first one. Does it really matter if this began with a real physical injury? Not a whole lot in my book, other than the sense of vulnerability that can come along with having been injured and the doubt that can come with that true injury. I understand that, and I'm totally empathic to it. It even makes some logical sense. But in the end, if it's the same process, it's the same process. So, in fact, this is the way to think about what true injuries do to us from a mind-body perspective. Actual injuries create a site of vulnerability. Now that part of the body is more quote-unquote injury-prone, because we're worried about it. It's understandable that we would be, but that's a very important part of how to think about these things and why a mind-body feedback loop begins after an injury. Now we protect it. We think about it more often. We're hypervigilant about it. So the injury does something to us physically initially, but this heals. The sense of vulnerability does not necessarily heal. We carry that with us all the time until we learn to have some confidence in our body in that area. So, I know there's another question out there. This is the question that usually follows it. Why did I develop mind-body issues from an injury when some don't? Well, this depends on a number of factors that could make you more vulnerable to your physical injury, leading to a chronic mind-body feedback loop. I'll give you some examples. Do you have a previous history with physical injuries? Are you already psychologically vulnerable from trauma in the past? Are you someone who tends to worry a lot in the first place? These are some reasons that you could more easily develop a mind-body issue that started with a physical injury. And I just want to underline, the reason I'm talking about all of this is that so many people were totally fine until that injury. So it is logical that they would wonder, didn't the injury cause the problem? I would say the experience of the injury caused the problem. Here's some more questions to ask yourself. Was the injury you sustained traumatic to you psychologically in and of itself? Because if it was, that's a more likely indication that you could develop a mind-body issue. Did the injury occur during a time of larger stress or bigger life events? If so, TMS or mind-body issues or PPD, whatever we want to call it, may be utilizing the physical experience to cause doubt and create a mind-body issue. It is looking for those crevices to climb into. Doubt is looking for that. Here are a couple of examples that I've experienced in the work that I've done to show you what I mean. I was working with a patient in recent years. He had a surfing accident and a punctured lung. He had not had physical issues before that. Now, the interesting thing is he didn't develop a symptom around the punctured lung. He was doing meditation to try to get better from that, and that led to chronic headaches. But what we uncovered is this initial physical injury led to a true sense of vulnerability. In a way, it was as if it was the first time he realized he actually was immortal. Not immortal, amortal. And that's a big deal. It's something that we need to keep in mind. Not everybody is so aware of their own mortality until something happens. It can happen sometimes if a grandparent dies, and suddenly you're like, whoa, this is real. So we start to move in that direction when we experience certain things physically or in the physical world. Another person I was working with had a work injury where he was hit on the head with a piece of camera equipment, and that led to a true concussion. Here's another true injury where he did not have mind-body issues before then, but that set off a cascade of events. He started to feel vulnerable in all kinds of ways, and he started to feel that his body was crumbling, and he started to feel that his age was showing, and it just spiraled out of control. So initial injuries can lead to an opening to doubt. Doubt is just looking for a crack to come in. Initial injuries are one of those biggest cracks. Now, here's another example. I've talked with some people about this. There's not a lot of literature out there about it or people talking about it, but people who have had botched surgeries are in a particularly difficult place. I can't say that I know what goes on medically with botched surgeries, but and they do happen, and it's a horrific thing. But there's a couple things that I can say that are kind of rules of thumb about this. Before I do that, though, I just wanted to acknowledge the vulnerability in that kind of situation is greater than your average injury. There's more uncertainty, and there's more room for doubt. It just calls into question so many things, especially given the fact that the people who were supposed to help you, or these people, didn't, and in fact did harm. But here's some rules of thumb that I use to try to quell doubt in these areas. Fortunately, I have not experienced a botched surgery myself, at least not to my knowledge. But my heart goes out to people who have experienced it, and I think it would be helpful to try to think about it in a similar light to any other true injury. So, here's some rules of thumb. Do medical doctors think you should be able to heal from it? If they do, you can take them at their word. Here's another question. Was there damage to any structure that doesn't heal? Things like arteries, internal organs, stuff like that. In that case, a botched surgery can lead to lasting damage. But if it's to muscles, nerves, tendons, ligaments, that doesn't count in this argument because they've already been proven to be what Sarno called TMS or PPD, MBS, mind-body issues, whatever we want to call it. Those are soft tissue injuries, and those heal, whether they were from a botched surgery or not. And this is a controversial topic, and I know that, and we can talk more about it, but I like to give people at least the option to start to think about it in those ways. Now, if the answer to these questions is no, you likely have a mind-body issue, at least some component of it, if not fully, even if it can be severe because of the understandable trauma of the events. One thing you need to remember, there's rage in a botched surgery, just as there is when we're physically injured, but maybe even more so. People who were supposed to help us, a procedure that was supposed to help us, harmed us. The fact is we don't like being hurt. It's a reminder of our mortality, and it sometimes awakens the mind the mind-body feedback loop, because the fight or flight system has become activated by this new clear threat. So let me say it again. If you suffer a true physical injury, it can enact the mind-body process. It's like it jumpstarts it. Maybe you were totally fine before that event, and that's legitimate, and that's understandable, and that is what we see all the time in a subsection of the population that develops mind-body issues. So you're not weird for that, but you need to know that doesn't mean it's not a mind-body issue in the end. If it lasts beyond the healing time, you got a mind-body issue. Now, one last point that must be made about distinguishing between real injuries and physical events that begin a mind-body process but aren't true injuries. Some quote-unquote real injuries are actually just triggers rather than true injuries. I am not saying that is always going to be the case, but you do need to evaluate it. If there was a blunt force trauma like a collision or a fall, especially if the pain began right afterwards, you can view this as a true injury that will heal. But you also need to consider it might be both a real injury and also a mind-body feedback loop developing. If this is the case, you have a chance to intervene with yourself and prevent it from becoming any more serious than it needs to be. You might get better much faster this way. I had this kind of thing happen. I was playing catch with my nephew. I hit my thumb against my leg on the follow-through, and it jammed my thumb. And I've jammed my thumb before, and it usually swells up and takes a week to feel better. But I challenged it. I said, I don't know about this. Yes, this was a real physical event, but is it a real physical injury, or is it a trigger? I truly wasn't sure, but I gave it a try, and it never swelled up. And the pain went away in minutes. Was that luck? I guess it's possible, but I don't usually think that luck is much of a factor. Now, is this always going to be the case? No. There are real injuries. But my point is, it's all about the time frame. Even real injuries can develop into a mind-body issue at a certain point. So broken bones are 100% real and take the time to heal that they take. And cuts are the same, but they all do heal. So be wary of triggers, as they're very powerful and strong, and they can take any smaller collision or trauma or fall and make things much worse. If the pain's showing up later, that's a sign of a trigger. It's something you got worried about. Now, in general, I've come to see my body as being a bit like, if you're a superhero fan, Wolverine. I don't heal that fast at all, but I do heal from everything. I'm a slow-motion Wolverine, and so are you. Sometimes I work on it at the moment of injury and disarm the trigger in the way that I did with my thumb. And this can often help me not develop an injury. And I'm phrasing it that way because that's important. There are true physical injuries that take the time to heal that they take. There are purely mind-body experiences that come out of emotion, doubt, or power column issues. And then there's overlap too, an injury that begins these issues. And that's very frequent. And that's why I'm highlighting this. If you're in doubt, you got to check in with a medical doctor you trust. And to trust a medical doctor, I would say try going to one who is mind-body informed, because otherwise they could feed your worries. If your symptoms become worse after seeing the doctor and receiving some kind of minor diagnosis, again, major diagnosis you need to follow medically, as the doctor knows best about these. But if they're minor and then the symptoms get worse afterwards, like let's say you go get an MRI and there's a slight tear and a herniated disc and suddenly your back is worse, this is a sign of a mind-body issue. This is a trigger. If you want to get better from a real injury and not develop a mind-body process, here are the action steps of the mind and pieces of logic you can use to combat it. Everyone heals, unless there is a major medical condition or damage to internal organs that are not musculoskeletal. Nerve damage, I should just address. It usually does heal. Sometimes it takes longer, but sometimes not. You should treat nerve damage as if it can get better, because it almost always does. Here's another question you can ask yourself. Why would your body be different than anyone else's? I also sometimes rely on evolution. Why did we evolve over millions of years to have these minor problems from minor accidents? If your symptoms last longer than 12 weeks, something's up. If your symptoms come and go, that's a mind-body issue. And here's the thing. If they're constant, it still could be a mind-body issue because you haven't tried out questioning it as a mind-body issue. Doubt is still cementing it there. So call into question the assumptions you have about your injury. You can't do any harm by questioning something in your mind. I mean, you could do harm if you question it and then go out for a run on a broken leg. Yes, that would be bad. But if you're not taking physical action, challenge it in your mind and then see. Still follow appropriate medical care. Follow the timelines doctors have given you for recovery, but challenge the triggers at every turn because they're a dominant factor in most physical injuries becoming mind-body issues. Calm down your fear response by remembering your body will heal itself on its own. You don't have to do all that work. If symptoms persist, mind-body symptoms, it's only because of fear. And in that case, you can do something about that. So you're never, ever stuck with an injury of the musculoskeletal system. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.